Money has a way of revealing truths people try to hide. I learned this standing outside my father's study, hearing him discuss my future, or rather the lack of one he'd planned for me. We can't afford both, Linda. Emily's law school has to take priority. Sarah will have to make do with the diner job. My fingers dug into the doorframe as I listened. 22 years of being the family afterthought crystallized in that moment. The golden child, Emily, would get her shot at becoming a prestigious attorney while I'd be slinging hash browns at Pete's diner. But Robert, we promised both girls we'd help with their education. My mother's voice wavered, weak as always. Emily has real potential, Sarah. Sarah just needs to be practical. I stepped back from the door, my chest tight with something between rage and vindication. All those years of telling myself I was imagining things, that my parents couldn't possibly favour Emily so blatantly, gone in an instant. The house felt suffocating. I grabbed my keys and jacket, needing to escape before I did something stupid like confront them right then. But fate had other plans. Sarah, where are you going? Emily appeared at the top of the stairs, perfect as always in her designer outfit. Mum's making dinner. Family night, remember? I almost laughed. Family night? What a joke. Not feeling well, I managed, heading for the door. Wait, Emily descended the stairs, concern etched on her face. Is everything okay? You look upset. Everything's fine, just like always, perfect actually, just like you. She flinched at my tone. What's that supposed to mean? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Just like my future, apparently. Sarah? The door slammed behind me with satisfying force. I made it halfway down the driveway before my father's voice boomed from the porch. Young lady, get back here right now. I turned, seeing him silhouetted in the doorway, my mother and Emily hovering anxiously behind him. 22 years of swallowed words rose in my throat. Why? So you can tell me to my face that I'm not worth investing in? That Emily's the only one who deserves a future? His face darkened. You were eavesdropping. Damn right I was. And I'm glad I did. Finally got some honesty around here. Sarah, please. My mother stepped forward. We can discuss this. Discuss what? How you've spent years funneling everything to Emily while telling me to be practical, to lower my expectations, to settle. Emily's face had gone pale. That's not fair. Life isn't fair, sis. But you wouldn't know about that, would you? My father's voice turned cold. That's enough. You're being childish and ungrateful. Ungrateful? I laughed, the sound harsh even to my own ears. For what? The lifetime of being second best? The constant comparisons? Or maybe I should be grateful for the diner job you've so generously planned for my future. If you'd shown half the dedication Emily has, I got better grades than she did. I worked 2 jobs through high school while she went to dance lessons and tennis camp. I did everything right, and it still wasn't enough. Silence fell. My mother was crying now. Emily looked stricken. And my father just looked disappointed, as usual. If that's how you feel, he said finally, perhaps you should leave until you've calmed down and can be reasonable. Don't worry, I said, backing away. I'm done being reasonable, I'm done being practical, and I'm done being the family disappointment. I got in my car, hands shaking as I turned the key. Through the windshield, I could see them still standing there. The perfect family tableau, minus the inconvenient second daughter who'd finally stopped playing her assigned role. As I drove away, one thought crystallized in my mind. I was going to prove them wrong. And when I did, they'd regret every moment they'd spent underestimating me. I ended up at Aunt Clara's house that night, my hands still shaking as I clutched a cup of chamomile tea. Her Victorian home had always been my sanctuary, filled with antiques and the lingering scent of lavender. Tonight it felt like my last refuge. Your father called, Aunt Clara said, settling into her worn leather armchair. He seems to think you're being unreasonable. Of course he does. The tea burned my throat. Did he mention the part where they've saved nothing for my education? Or how they expect me to spend my life serving pancakes while Emily becomes a lawyer? Aunt Clara's eyes narrowed. No, he conveniently left that out. A knock at the door made me jump. Aunt Clara touched my shoulder as she passed, her grip surprisingly strong for a woman of 70. I heard murmured voices, then my mother's distinctive pleading tone. "Sarah, please, we need to talk." I set down my cup with enough force to splash tea onto the antique coffee table. "There's nothing to talk about." My mother appeared in the doorway looking smaller than usual. "Your father didn't mean—" "Yes, he did." I stood up. "He meant every word. He always has." "You're both upset. If we could just sit down as a family." "We're not a family. We're Emily's support system, and I'm just the backup plan that never quite measured up." Aunt Clara returned, her face set in lines I recognized from childhood, the expression she wore when she was about to shake things up. "Linda," she said, "sit down. We need to discuss some things." My mother perched on the edge of the sofa, twisting her wedding ring. "Clara, this is between us and Sarah." "No, it's not." Aunt Clara opened a drawer in her desk, pulling out a thick envelope. "Sarah, I've been waiting for the right moment to give you this. I suppose that moment is now." The envelope felt heavy in my hands. Inside was a bank statement showing an account in my name, with a balance that made my eyes widen. "I started saving for both you girls when you were born," Aunt Clara said. "Your parents knew about Emily's fund, but I kept yours separate. I had a feeling you might need it more." My mother's face went pale. "Clara, you had no right." "I had every right. I've watched for years as you and Robert poured everything into Emily while Sarah fought for scraps of attention. Well, now she has options." The numbers on the statement blurred as tears filled my eyes. College tuition, a future, freedom. "You can't do this," my mother whispered. "I already have." Aunt Clara's voice was steel wrapped in silk. "Sarah, the money is yours. No strings attached. You can use it for college, start a business, whatever you choose." My mother stood abruptly. "Robert will hear about this." "Good," Aunt Clara replied. "Tell him his sister sees exactly what he's done to his daughters. Both of them." After my mother left, slamming the door behind her, I sat in silence, staring at the statement. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" I finally asked. "I wanted to see if they'd do the right thing on their own." Aunt Clara sighed. "I should have known better. Emily's fund is separate and safe. This isn't about punishing her, Sarah. It's about giving you the chance you deserve." I thought about Emily, golden child Emily, who'd never had to wonder if she was enough. "They'll try to make me share it with her." "They can try." Aunt Clara's smile was sharp. "But the account is in your name only. I made sure of that." Looking at her, I saw the steel beneath her gentle exterior. She'd been playing the long game, watching and waiting, preparing for this moment. "What do I do now?" I asked. "Whatever you want. That's the beauty of it." She leaned forward. "But might I suggest starting with that business degree you've always dreamed about?" For the first time since overhearing my father's words, I felt something like hope, but mixed with it was something darker, a determination to show them exactly what their practical daughter could do. "They'll never forgive you for this," I said. Aunt Clara's laugh was dry as autumn leaves. "My dear, at my age, forgiveness is far less interesting than justice. Now, shall we look at college applications?" I smiled, feeling the weight of the envelope in my hands. It wasn't just money, it was ammunition. And I intended to use every bullet. 3 months into my first semester at business school, Aunt Clara called with news that made my coffee go cold. Emily's perfect life was imploding, and for once I had a front-row seat to the disaster. "Mark was arrested this morning," Aunt Clara said, her voice crackling through the phone. "Securities fraud. It's all over the local news." I switched to speaker and pulled up the news site. There he was, Mark Johnson, Emily's boyfriend of 2 years, being led out of his investment firm in handcuffs. The golden boy who'd charmed our parents at every family dinner was now accused of running a Ponzi scheme that had cost his clients millions. "Emily must be devastated," I said, surprised to find I meant it. "That's not all." Aunt Clara paused. "She knew Sarah. She worked in the firm's legal department. They're investigating her involvement." The satisfaction I'd expected to feel didn't come. Instead, my stomach twisted. How bad is it? Your father's firm is distancing itself. They've put her on indefinite leave. Your parents… Another pause. They're selling the lake house to cover her legal fees. The lake house? The same one they'd refused to mortgage for my education. My phone buzzed with another call, Emily's number. I declined it, watching as it immediately lit up again. She's been trying to reach you, Aunt Clara said. I'm not ready to talk to her. Sometimes people surprise us, Sarah, even the ones who've hurt us most. I ended the call and sat in silence, watching Emily's name flash on my screen again and again. Finally, I picked up. Sarah? Her voice was raw, nothing like her usual polished tones. I need your help. That's new. I deserve that. She took a shuddering breath. But please just listen. I can't talk to Mom and Dad about this. They wouldn't understand. Understand what? That their perfect daughter isn't so perfect? That I knew what Mark was doing, and I looked the other way. The words tumbled out. I found discrepancies in the paperwork months ago. He convinced me it was just aggressive investment strategy, that everyone did it. I wanted to believe him. Why are you telling me this? Because you're the only one who won't be shocked that I failed. Her laugh was bitter. You've been expecting it all along, haven't you? I thought about all the times I'd wished for this, for Emily to fall, for our parents to see her flaws. The reality felt hollow. The investigators, she continued, they're offering a deal. If I testify against Mark, they'll grant me immunity. But Mom and Dad, they keep talking about loyalty, about standing by him. They don't understand what he really is. And what's that? A monster in an expensive suit, her voice cracked. Just like I was a fraud in designer clothes, pretending to be something I'm not. I closed my eyes, remembering all the perfect family photos. Emily always front and center, me relegated to the edges. Why should I help you? Because you're smarter than me, Sarah. You always were. You saw through everything. Our parents, their expectations, this whole facade. I need that clarity now. You want my advice? Take the deal. Burn it all down. Silence stretched between us. Then, will you come with me to the prosecutor's office? I thought about my morning class, the midterm I should be studying for. When? Tomorrow at 9. She hesitated. I know I don't deserve your help. No, you don't. I cut her off. But I'll be there. Not for you. For the truth. After we hung up, I sat staring at my reflection in the darkened window. The sister who'd always lived in Emily's shadow was now the one she turned to for strength. The irony wasn't lost on me. My phone lit up with a text from our father. Emily needs her family united right now. Whatever issues you have with us need to wait. I typed back 4 words. I'll handle it myself. Just like I always had. Tomorrow I'd watch Emily dismantle her perfect life piece by piece. Part of me would enjoy it. I wasn't saint enough to pretend otherwise. But another part recognized something familiar in her voice, the sound of someone realizing their whole life had been built on shadows and lies. I opened my laptop and began researching securities fraud cases. If Emily was going to burn it all down, I'd make sure she did it right. After all, revenge is a dish best served with impeccable legal documentation. The Dean's List notification arrived the same morning as Emily's sentencing. I stared at both messages on my phone, wondering if this was Karma's idea of poetry. Top of my class in business school while my sister faced 18 months of probation and mandatory community service. My father's name lit up my screen. I hadn't spoken to him since the prosecutor's office, but I answered anyway. Your mother and I are having dinner at Lorenzo's tonight, he said, skipping any greeting. We need to discuss Emily's situation. I have exams. This is family, Sarah. More important than any test. I watched students stream past my dorm window, heading to class. Funny how family wasn't more important than Emily's law school when it came to my education. That's not fair. Actually, it's exactly fair. Emily made her choices. She can deal with the consequences. She's lost everything, he said, his voice cracking. Her career, her reputation. And you're still more worried about her than proud of me. The words slipped out before I could stop them. Silence stretched between us. Then, what do you mean? I made Dean's List, first semester of business school, not that you asked. More silence. I could almost see him processing this information, trying to fit it into his worldview where Emily was the achiever and I was the practical one. That's wonderful, Sarah. But right now, Emily needs help. Of course, I laughed, the sound harsh even to my own ears. You know what? I have to go. Good luck with dinner. I ended the call and opened my laptop, pulling up the business proposal I'd been working on. Greg Matthews, the restaurant chain owner who'd given me my first job, had mentioned an internship opportunity. My proposal was due tomorrow. A knock at my door interrupted my thoughts. Emily stood there, looking smaller in jeans and a plain sweater. No more designer labels. Aunt Clara told me about Dean's List, she said. Congratulations. I left the door open, but returned to my desk. Thanks, she hovered in the doorway. Mum and Dad don't get it, do they? How hard you've worked. They don't want to get it. It doesn't fit their narrative. I didn't either. She stepped inside, closing the door. I believed what they believed, that I was the successful one, the one with potential. But you? She picked up one of my textbooks. You're going to surpass everything they ever imagined for me. Is that why you're here? To acknowledge my potential? No. She set the book down. I'm here because Dad called. They're planning to ask you for money tonight for my legal fees. The room seemed to tilt slightly. What? The lake house sale fell through. They're desperate. She wrapped her arms around herself. I told them not to ask you, but they won't listen. They still think they can fix everything for me. I turned back to my laptop, fingers hovering over the keyboard. And what do you think? I think it's time I fix things myself. She moved toward the door. I got a job. Nothing special. Administrative work at a small firm, but it's honest work. Why are you telling me this? Because you were right. About everything. And I wanted you to know that, before they try to drag you back into their version of reality tonight. After she left, I sat staring at my business proposal. The internship would be demanding. 60-hour weeks, intense training, no room for family drama. Exactly what I needed. I opened my phone and typed a message to my father. Can't make dinner. Deadline for an opportunity I can't miss. Emily knows how to reach me if she needs to. Then I turned back to my proposal, adding a final section about navigating complex business relationships and maintaining professional boundaries. Greg Matthews would appreciate the irony, even if he never knew the full story. My phone buzzed with responses from my parents, but I didn't read them. Instead, I focused on my work, letting their messages pile up like the years of expectations I was finally learning to ignore. Sometimes revenge isn't about destroying someone else's dreams. Sometimes it's about building your own, brick by brick, while they watch from the sidelines, finally understanding what they failed to see. Life has a twisted sense of humor. I discovered this standing outside Pete's diner, watching Emily tie on the same apron our father had once intended for me. Her hands shook as she struggled with the strings, her manicured nails a stark contrast against the worn fabric. Greg Matthews stood beside me, his presence a reminder of why we were here. Your sister starts training today? Apparently. I checked my watch. We should head inside. The investment meeting. Can wait 5 minutes. He studied Emily through the window. Interesting choice, her working here. Desperate times. I adjusted my blazer, the fabric smooth and expensive against my skin. It's the only place that would hire her with her record. The bell chimed as we entered. Emily's head snapped up, her eyes widening at my business attire. I pretended not to notice, leading Greg to our usual booth. Sarah. Emily approached, notepad trembling slightly. I didn't know you were coming in today. Monthly investment meeting with Greg, we always have it here. I kept my voice neutral. Coffee black, Greg. The same. He watched Emily hurry away. You didn't warn her? Should I have? The door chimed again. Our parents walked in, stopping short when they saw me. Of course they'd come to support Emily's first day. The irony wasn't lost on me. Sarah? My mother stepped forward. We didn't expect... Clearly, I turned to Greg. The projection reports show a 30% increase in revenue since implementing your new system. My father approached our table, his presence casting a shadow over our papers. You look well, Sarah. The business world suits you. Dad. Emily returned with our coffee, nearly spilling it. It's fine, Emily. I pulled out my laptop. They're here for you, not me. Greg and I have work to discuss. Actually, my father cleared his throat, we hope to speak with both of you about the family trust. The laptop screen blurred slightly. What trust? Your grandfather's. He glanced at Greg. Perhaps we could discuss this privately. Greg's my business partner. Anything you need to say, you can say in front of him. My mother touched Emily's arm. Sweetheart, maybe you should take your break now. The trust, my father continued, was meant to be split between you girls, but with Emily's legal fees and the conditions of her probation, the pieces clicked into place. You want my half? We want to protect your sister's future. Greg set down his coffee cup with deliberate care. Robert, perhaps this isn't the best time. When is the best time? My voice cut through the diner's morning chatter. When Emily needs more money? When you've run out of ways to prop up her mistakes? Sarah, my mother pleaded, she's trying to rebuild. By taking my inheritance, after everything? I stood, gathering my papers. Greg, we should continue this at the office. Sarah, please. Emily stepped forward, still clutching her notepad. I didn't know they were going to do this. I told them not to. Save it. I met her eyes. You know what's funny? Dad always said I should work here because it was practical, because it was all I could hope for. Now look at us. My father's face darkened. That's enough. No, it's not enough. I turned to Greg. You know why I work so hard? Why I've doubled our profits in 6 months? Because they taught me that nothing would ever be handed to me. And they were right. The diner had gone quiet, other customers pretending not to watch the drama unfolding. Keep the trust, I said, gathering my things. Consider it payment for showing me exactly who I could become by being nothing like any of you. Greg followed me out, waiting until we reached the car to speak. That was quite a scene. I apologize. It won't affect our business. Sarah. He touched my shoulder. I'm promoting you to regional manager. You've earned it. And clearly you need to get as far from this town as possible. I gripped my laptop, knuckles white. Through the diner window, I could see Emily wiping tables while our parents hovered nearby, still trying to fix her life while mine expanded beyond their reach. When do I start? How fast can you pack? I smiled, feeling lighter than I had in years. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about getting even, it's about getting away. 6 months into my role as regional manager, Aunt Clara died. The news came via text from Emily, of all people. 3 words that shattered my carefully constructed new life. Aunt Clara's gone. I stood in my office overlooking the Chicago skyline, my reflection ghostly in the window. The quarterly reports I'd been reviewing blurred into meaningless shapes. My phone buzzed again. Emily. The funeral's Saturday. She left something for you. I booked the first flight home, arriving to find my parents' car already in Aunt Clara's driveway. Of course they'd be here, probably already dividing up her possessions like they'd tried to divide my inheritance. The key was still under the ceramic frog where she'd always kept it. Inside, voices drifted from her study. We have to tell her, my mother was saying, before she finds out some other way. Tell me what? I stepped into the doorway. They jumped, guilty faces turning toward me. Emily sat in Aunt Clara's chair, holding a familiar envelope. Sarah, my father stepped forward. We didn't expect you so soon. Clearly. I noticed the open safe behind the desk, papers scattered across the surface. What are you doing? Emily held up the envelope. Aunt Clara left letters. And recordings. And she recorded everything, my mother whispered. All our conversations about you and Emily, about the college fund, about how you planned to use me as Emily's backup plan. The words tasted bitter. I already knew that. No, Emily's voice cracked. About how they planned to use both of us, how they manipulated everything, played us against each other. Even Aunt Clara's money was part of their plan. The room tilted slightly. What? My father reached for me. Sarah, we can explain. Don't touch me. I snatched the envelope from Emily. Inside was a USB drive and a letter in Aunt Clara's elegant handwriting. My dearest Sarah, it began. By now you've discovered that your parents' manipulation runs deeper than you imagined. The money I gave you wasn't just savings. It was evidence. Every transaction, every conversation recorded. Your father's firm has been embezzling funds for years, using both you and Emily as unwitting covers. The letter dropped from my trembling hands. You used us. Both of us. We were trying to protect the family, my father said. The firm was failing. So you set Emily up with Mark, knowing he was running a Ponzi scheme. Let her take the fall while you cleaned up the evidence. Emily made a small, broken sound. They knew. All along they knew what Mark was doing. And me? I turned to my mother. Was anything real? Or was I just another piece in your game? We're still your parents, she pleaded. Everything we did was for the family. I laughed, the sound harsh and foreign. No, it was for you. For your reputation, your lifestyle, your precious image. My phone buzzed. Greg Matthews calling. Probably wondering why his regional manager had suddenly flown cross-country without explanation. Sarah, Emily stood up. Aunt Clara left something else. Evidence that could expose everything. She wanted us to decide together what to do with it. I stared at my sister, seeing not the golden child who'd had everything handed to her, but another victim of our parents' schemes. You knew, I said to Emily, about the recordings. That's why you've been reaching out. She nodded. Aunt Clara told me last month she wanted us to know the truth before she couldn't tell us herself. My phone buzzed again. Greg's name flashed on the screen, a reminder of the life I'd built, the success I'd achieved thinking it was all to prove my parents wrong. But they'd known. They'd planned it all, probably counting on my drive to succeed, on Emily's fall from grace, on our predictable reactions to their careful manipulations. Sarah, Emily's voice was small, what do we do now? I looked at our parents, these strangers who'd orchestrated our entire lives like some twisted chess game, then at Emily, who'd lost everything only to discover she'd never really had it to begin with. My phone buzzed a third time. We do what Aunt Clara wanted, I said finally. We decide together, but this time we make our own moves. The USB drive felt heavy in my hand, carrying the weight of truths that could destroy what remained of our family, or finally set us free. The conference room at Matthew's restaurant group felt too small for the weight of what we were about to do. Emily sat beside me, her waitress uniform replaced by a borrowed business suit, while Greg Matthews studied the USB drive's contents displayed on the projection screen. This is more than embezzlement, Greg said, pausing on a particularly damning spreadsheet. Your father's firm was running a sophisticated fraud scheme for years, using both his daughters as unwitting accomplices, Emily added, her voice hollow. The perfect cover story. The door opened. Our parents walked in, followed by their lawyer. My father's confident stride faltered when he saw Emily sitting beside me. What is this about, Sarah? He tried to take control, as always. Your mother and I have a charity function. Sit down. My voice cut through his pretense. You're going to want to hear this. Greg clicked to the next slide. Our father's signature on documents linking his firm to Mark's Ponzi scheme. Evidence of shell companies set up in both Emily's and my names. Where did you get these? The lawyer leaned forward. Aunt Clara kept receipts. I met my father's eyes. All of them. This is absurd, he blustered. Emily, surely you don't believe... I testified against Mark, Emily interrupted. I can testify against you, too. Our mother's perfectly manicured hands trembled. We were protecting you both. By making me the fool guy? Emily's laugh was bitter. By pushing Sarah into the restaurant business so you'd have a legitimate front for laundering money? I placed 2 folders on the table. Option 1. We turn everything over to the FBI. You go to prison, the firm collapses, and the Thompson name becomes synonymous with fraud. Option 2, our father's lawyer asked quickly. You sign these papers transferring control of the firm to Emily and me. You retire quietly, move to that beach house in Florida you bought with stolen money and never contact us again. You can't be serious. Our father stood. Everything I built was built on lies. I remained seated, calm. Everything you made us believe about ourselves, about each other, it was all part of your game. We're your parents, our mother pleaded. We love you. No, Emily's voice cracked. You loved what we could do for you. There's a difference. Greg cleared his throat. The FBI has been notified. They're waiting for our call. You have 10 minutes to decide. Our father reached for the folders, but I pulled them back. One more thing. The diner, Pete's. You're signing it over to the staff. They've earned it. The diner? He looked confused. What does that matter now? It matters because it's where this started. Where you thought I belonged. I smiled. Consider it karma. The minutes ticked by. Emily gripped my hand under the table as our parents whispered with their lawyer. Finally, our father picked up a pen. You'll regret this, he said, signing. Someday you'll understand. We already understand. Emily took the pen, adding her signature where needed. That's the problem. After they left, Greg studied the signed papers. You realize you've just become CEO of a major investment firm. Co-CEO, I corrected, looking at Emily. If you want it? She straightened her borrowed blazer. I did pass the bar exam even if I never practiced. Besides, someone needs to clean up their mess. And you? Greg asked me. Still interested in running my restaurant chain? I thought about the diner, about all the paths that had led us here. Actually, I have some ideas about expansion. Emily's firm could provide the capital. Legal capital, Emily added with a faint smile. We walked out together, leaving our parents' lawyer to pack up his briefcase. Outside, the sun was setting over the city skyline. Was this the revenge you wanted? Emily asked softly. No, I admitted. It's better. They wanted us to compete, to tear each other down. Instead we're building something new. She squared her shoulders. Together. I nodded, watching our parents' car disappear into traffic. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about destroying what others built. It's about building something they never thought possible. The key to Aunt Clara's house felt heavier than usual as I unlocked the door one last time. The realtor's sign in the yard cast long shadows in the evening light. Inside, most of the furniture was gone, leaving only the essentials Emily and I had decided to keep. Her footsteps echoed behind me as we entered the study. Found something else in the safe, she said, holding up a DVD case. It's labeled, for Sarah and Emily, after. We sat on the floor using my laptop to play the disc. Aunt Clara's face filled the screen, recorded months before her death. My dear girls, she began, if you're watching this, you've discovered the truth about your parents. But there's one more thing you need to know. Emily gripped my arm as Aunt Clara continued. Your parents didn't just manipulate you. They manipulated me too, made me think I was protecting you by keeping their secrets. It took me too long to realize that protection sometimes means letting the truth hurt. The camera shifted, showing documents, recordings, a lifetime of evidence gathered not just against our parents, but against an entire network of fraud. I'm not proud that I waited, Aunt Clara's voice continued, but I wanted you both strong enough to handle what came next. Sarah, your business acumen. Emily, your legal knowledge. Together, you're more powerful than they ever imagined. Emily paused the video. She planned this. All of it. No, I said, understanding finally. She gave us the tools to plan it ourselves. We watched the rest in silence. When it ended, I closed the laptop, looking around the study where everything had started. The diner staff signed the ownership papers today, Emily said. They're renaming it Clara's. I smiled, remembering our father's dismissal of my potential, his insistence that the diner was all I could hope for. Now it would stand as a monument to the aunt who'd seen what he couldn't. The FBI wants to interview Dad again, Emily continued. They found connections to 3 more investment firms. Let them. We have our own empire to build. She studied me. Do you ever wonder if we're just playing into their hands, becoming what they wanted us to be? No. I stood, running my fingers along Aunt Clara's empty desk. They wanted us to compete, to tear each other down. Instead, we're stronger together. Emily joined me at the desk. The board meeting's tomorrow. Ready to announce the merger. Matthews Thompson Holdings. I tested the words. Think Greg will mind being the junior partner? He's getting 3 new restaurant locations out of the deal. He'll survive. We gathered our things, preparing to leave Aunt Clara's house for the last time. At the door, Emily hesitated. Sarah, that night you overheard Mom and Dad talking about the diner. Was that really when everything changed? I thought about it, remembering the anger, the hurt, the years of feeling second best. No. Everything changed when I stopped letting their version of me define who I could become. And who are you now? The question hung in the air as I locked the door. Through the window I could see Aunt Clara's garden still blooming despite her absence. I'm someone who knows the difference between revenge and justice, I said finally. And more importantly, I'm someone who knows which one matters more. Emily nodded, understanding. We walked to our separate cars, headed to our separate homes, but connected now by something stronger than shared pain or shared triumph. I started my engine, watching Emily pull away first. Tomorrow we'd face the board, announce the merger, begin building something neither our parents nor Aunt Clara could have imagined. But tonight, in the quiet of Aunt Clara's empty house, I felt the last pieces of my old self, the angry, overlooked second daughter, finally fall away. The truth about revenge isn't that it heals you. It's that sometimes in pursuing it, you find something better. The power to rewrite your own story, on your own terms. I pulled away from the curb, leaving Aunt Clara's house and all its ghosts behind. Ahead lay the future we'd chosen, not the one chosen for us. And that, more than any revenge, was the sweetest victory of all.
I was really looking forward to when you would bring up divorce, you know. Seriously, being poor without parents is just no good. With a mocking smile, Dorothy said this in a sharp voice. I had been tormented by Dorothy, my mother-in-law, since the beginning of my marriage. She would barge into the house where my husband and I lived without asking. Wait for me to come home from work, and endlessly complain while watching me do housework. The way I cleaned, how I folded the laundry, the seasoning of the food. She would meddle in everything, but Dorothy never offered to help. One day, after enduring so much, I finally reached my limit. You were raised in a fatherless home. So you never really learned how to cook properly, did you? Your taste buds are so messed up, your food isn't even good. Dorothy, who had been sampling the food without permission, hurled such abuse. I had been raised by my grandfather since I was a child, as my parents were not around. I couldn't forgive her for mocking my grandfather, knowing this. In a fit of anger, I brought up divorce, and both Dorothy and Howard readily agreed. Dorothy, spewing things with a tone of satisfaction, was joined by Howard saying, "That's right. The difference in family status was just too great. Next time, we'll find someone with a family as good as ours." But the two of them didn't know. The time when they could laugh was only temporary. In the not-too-distant future, they would learn the truth and collapse in despair. My name is Lucy Thompson, a 33-year-old part-time housewife. 2 years ago, I married Howard, a senior colleague at work. He had been teaching me various things since I joined the company. If you don't understand something, feel free to ask me anything, he said with a kind smile, completely capturing my heart. I, who had little experience in love, couldn't actively approach him. Asking work-related questions was all I could manage. even thinking about asking personal questions or inviting him out for a meal after work made my face hot. However, Howard eventually asked me out. I was attracted to your hardworking and sincere demeanor. Would you like to date me? I nodded without hesitation to his words. After dating for several years, we got married and started living together. In my heart, there was the joy of being able to be with the person I loved forever, as well as the relief of finally being able to reassure my grandfather. I had lost my parents when I was young, and my grandfather, Frank Irving, had taken me in and raised me. Why don't I have parents? During my rebellious phase, I would scream in a shrill voice at my grandfather, although I knew it wasn't his fault. Now that I'm an adult, such things are behind me, and we have a good relationship. The sad look on my grandfather's face at that time still haunts me. I felt guilty for causing him trouble and wanted to repay him somehow. I decided to be as filial as possible. I gave him presents with my first salary, took him on trips for his birthday, and brought him to nice restaurants. By marrying Howard and building a family, I thought I had finally truly reassured him. Lucy, be happy. At the wedding, my grandfather said this through tears, and I cried too. Initially, Howard and I were busy with work, but we had recently settled down and started thinking about having children. Of course, I wanted children, but the pressure from my mother-in-law, Dorothy, was also a factor that made me think seriously about it. Lucy, you've been married for 2 years now, haven't you? Don't you want to give me a grandchild soon? I couldn't count how many times she had said something like that. Yes, eventually. I would vaguely smile and divert the topic. But being confronted every time we met was quite stressful. Even when I looked to Howard for help, whether he noticed or pretended not to see, he said nothing. Tired of enduring the pressure to have grandchildren, I reduced my visits to my in-laws' home. But it was in vain. Dorothy started barging into the house where Howard and I lived. "Huh, Mother. Why are you here?" When I first witnessed this, I exclaimed in surprise, but Dorothy remained calm and said, "Howard gave me a spare key. We're family, so there's no problem coming in, right?" What initially happened only on weekends now occurred even on weekdays, mercilessly. About 3 to 4 days a week, I was greeted by Dorothy in the living room as I came home. I had gotten used to it, or rather, since she wouldn't stop no matter how many times I said it, I was resigned to saying, "I'm home," as a habit. And if you wondered whether Dorothy did any housework before we returned, the answer is no. On the contrary, she would say, "Hurry up and prepare dinner. I've been waiting and am starving," while I was still putting away my things and starting to cook. Outwardly, I would obediently respond, but inside, I deeply sighed. I had argued back before, but that would only lead to a long lecture. Well, even if I didn't say anything back, Dorothy would still give unsolicited advice, or rather lectures, about housework. When I returned home late due to overtime and tried to heat up some leftovers, Dorothy would say, "Leftovers? Are you cutting corners? Food should be freshly cooked. Surely you're not letting Howard eat such terrible meals." Dorothy would criticize without lifting a finger to help, so I was utterly fed up with her. Even if I showed a hint of dissatisfaction, she would scream, "What, do you have a problem with what I'm saying? I'm giving you advice as someone with more life experience." As these incidents continued, I grew more adept at ignoring Dorothy's nagging. But there was something I couldn't forgive. While waiting for us to return, Dorothy would use the water and electricity without any consideration. Once, she left the TV on while taking a nap during the day. Thanks to, or rather because of, her actions, our utility bills were skyrocketing. Tired of her behavior, I consulted Howard several times, asking him to talk to his mother and request the return of the spare key, but he wouldn't listen. "Oh, don't say things like that," he would chide me with a smile. From his perspective, Dorothy's actions were her way of trying to get along with me. "Don't be so tense, I want us to get along," Howard would say, apparently out of goodwill, so I couldn't speak up strongly. But Dorothy's remarks kept escalating for the worse. "Really, Lucy, you're so clumsy. Maybe it's because you're from a single-parent family that things don't work out?" She would start saying things that belittled my grandfather, my guardian. And I had reached my limit. Apparently, Dorothy thought raising children as a couple was superior to being a single parent. Then, one day, I received a surprising message. "Today, your mother-in-law visited unexpectedly." The person who contacted me was a woman named Olivia, the secretary at my grandfather's company. I couldn't see her face over the phone, but I could easily tell from her tone of voice that she was making a bitter expression. What? Why would she do that? Could it be that she went to tell my grandfather the same kind of insults she usually says to me? I imagined Dorothy, with a sneering smile, spewing out words like, "Lucy is really incompetent, isn't she? You were like a parent to her, right? What kind of education did you give her?" However, contrary to my expectation, it seems she only came because the president had once said, "Please visit whenever you are nearby." She just came, ate her fill of tea snacks, and left. Apparently, Dorothy took my grandfather's polite invitation literally. "I had delicious sweets at your grandfather's company. It's so kind of him to say. Feel free to visit if you're nearby." Dorothy, who was usually waiting at our house, happily reported this to me as soon as I opened the front door. Although it's possible that my grandfather said that, can't Dorothy read between the lines? Even if she really did want to visit, isn't it common sense to contact him beforehand? I could only let out a dry laugh, dumbfounded. My response must have displeased her, as Dorothy's expression suddenly changed, furrowing her brow. And as usual, she began to make sarcastic remarks to me. "By the way, when are you going to manage to come home earlier? If you were more capable, you should be able to finish quickly and come home, right?" My lips twitched. I was used to hearing insults from Dorothy, but that didn't mean they didn't hurt. I tried not to take them too seriously, but I hadn't reached the point where I could just smile and ignore them. "If you don't come home early, Howard will always have to eat the unappetizing leftovers, won't he? Really, you lack the spirit to support your husband." "I'm sorry, I've been busy with work." How I wished I could say, "Then why don't you cook, Mother?" Instead, as I spoke, hiding my true feelings, Dorothy's eyes narrowed sharply. "Don't make excuses. The poor have no leisure" fits this situation perfectly. You're in this mess because you were raised by a single parent and don't have money. I couldn't hide my bewilderment at her words. I opened my mouth to retort, but all that came out were meaningless words like, "Well, you're just like that guardian grandfather of yours, aren't you? He was kind, sure, but his company is old and small. He probably hasn't achieved much in terms of performance. Your grandfather's clothes were always so shabby too. I wonder if he even has money to buy clothes." Being criticized alongside my grandfather was just too hard to take. Unable to endure it any longer, I raised my voice. "Please stop speaking ill of my grandfather. What do you know about him, Mother? This seemed to irritate Dorothy, as her face clearly showed her anger. Oh. A daughter-in-law talking back to her mother-in-law, how rude. Apologize right now, say I'm sorry for being impudent. I stood my ground and glared back at Dorothy. It was absolutely wrong for me to apologize after she insulted my dear grandfather. The one lacking common sense wasn't me, but Dorothy. What's with that look? It really irritates me. Dorothy yelled at me. She is shorter than me. But she seemed much bigger due to her intimidating presence. You're just upset because I hit the nail on the head, aren't you? Don't you feel ashamed that your grandfather still has to work hard at his age? That's not true at all. I am proud of my grandfather. But even when I expressed this, Dorothy just snorted dismissively and did not apologize to my grandfather. Oh, maybe it's not your grandfather who should feel ashamed, but you? Isn't it embarrassing that he has to work at his age because you're so poor? Worn out by Dorothy's baseless accusations, I lost the energy to argue back. I let out a loud sigh so she could hear and said, "Enough," before returning to my room. From that day on, Dorothy's treatment of me grew even harsher. And her frequency of invading our home also increased. Look, this isn't done right. Do it over immediately. Whenever my way of doing household chores displeased her, she would immediately scream at me. It started with complaints about dust left in the corners of the room or sloppy folding of laundry. And she even demanded I change the arrangement of the furniture because she didn't like it. Whenever I opened my mouth to say something, she would cut me off with a loud lecture. As this continued, I realized that if I didn't say anything, the lecture would end in about 15 minutes. It was a sad lesson to learn. As a result, whenever I heard Dorothy's angry voice, I would clench my jaw and endure silently. The lectures always happened when Howard was not around. Your mother came to the house again on her own. She even gave a lecture, "What should I do?" Although I told him this, he would never take my side against his mother. If I just endured, everything would end without incident. I understood this logically, but I couldn't accept it emotionally. And I found myself crying in secret in the bathroom late at night. Finally, my stress reached its limit, and the day came when my patience snapped. I lost count. It might have been the 100th or even more dinner with Dorothy and Howard. Of course, I hadn't invited Dorothy, she just imposed herself in our home. As I was setting the dinner table, Dorothy reached out and snatched food from a plate before we even said, "Let's eat." I frowned, but thinking that if Dorothy noticed my changed expression, a tedious lecture would start. I quickly shook my head to dismiss it. After chewing a few times, Dorothy swallowed and burst out. "What is this food? It's really awful. Make it again. You were raised in a fatherless home and weren't taught to cook properly by a man. Your taste is so messed up, the food isn't tasty at all." With a crude laugh, she spewed her insults. The moment I heard that, something snapped inside my head. So this is what it means for one's patience to snap, I realized firsthand. Indeed, my grandfather raised me. So what? Gender doesn't matter. My grandfather raised me with love. Please stop mocking my important family, I shouted, and even after that, my anger didn't subside. And I was panting as if I had been exercising for a while. Dorothy and Howard looked surprised at first, but their expressions quickly changed to mocking smiles. Seeing that, I was shocked that none of my feelings had gotten through to them. Let's get a divorce. I can't stay with people who endlessly mock others like you do. Ah, I understand. When I proposed divorce, they agreed surprisingly easily. In fact, they seemed pleased, as if they had been waiting for me to say it. I was really looking forward to when you would bring up divorce. Seriously, being poor without parents is just no good. I was worried about your poverty rubbing off on us, so it's great you brought it up. That's right. The difference in family status was just too great. Next time, we'll find someone with a family as good as ours. Dorothy was as usual. But Howard seemed like a completely different person than before we married. Where had the kind man who had gently guided me when I didn't understand something gone? No, perhaps this was his true nature. Well, now that it's settled, hurry up and leave, you broke loser. While enduring endless insults, I packed my things and asked my grandfather to pick me up. I bit my lower lip hard and made sure not to talk back anymore. Nothing would resonate with those two heartless people. Upon receiving a message from my grandfather that he had arrived, I left without saying thank you or goodbye. I just put on my shoes and opened the front door. There stood my grandfather, looking worried. Spotting him, Dorothy deepened her grin and jeered. "Oh dear, isn't it nice of your grandfather to come pick you up? You must be starting early again tomorrow for work, right? Poor people just don't get a break, huh?" Olivia, the secretary who had come with my grandfather, had a vein pop on her forehead upon hearing this. Without anyone noticing, she had prepared the divorce papers and pulled them out of her bag to present to Howard. "You had it prepared already? How kind of you." "That's right. It saves us the trouble, doesn't it?" While laughing with Dorothy, Howard immediately signed the divorce papers. The expressions on my face, my grandfather's, and Olivia's were completely different from theirs. We were all dead serious, emotion wiped from our faces. "I'll file the divorce papers myself." "Sure, take care of it, will you? Then hurry up and go. I'm happy that our child won't have any poverty in their bloodline." It seemed she couldn't be satisfied without a final jab. Even though I glared at her with all my might, Dorothy was unfazed. "Well, I'll go ahead with the president to bring the car around." Saying that, my grandfather and Olivia left. Then, for some reason, Howard and Dorothy also came down to the entrance of the apartment building. "I just thought we should properly say goodbye since you took care of us." Dorothy said this, but her true intention to mock us was transparent. I kept quiet since it was useless to say anything. But I couldn't stand them making a mockery of my grandfather. I was about to turn around and unleash a torrent of complaints, but Olivia stopped me. She was, for some reason, beaming with a wide smile. "I'm going to get the car, so hold back for now." She told me that and then went to the parking lot. Misunderstanding my inability to endure being laughed at as fleeing, Dorothy and Howard continued to laugh joyously. Then a luxury car arrived, and my grandfather got out. Seeing this, their eyes widened and they approached as if drawn by a magnet. "Wow, that car is pretty expensive, isn't it? No way that poor man bought it himself. He must have rented it to show off." It seemed they wouldn't be satisfied until they had ridiculed us completely. I got into the car and exchanged a knowing grin with my grandfather. Seeing us, Olivia crossed her arms and murmured meaningfully, "The real show starts now." The next day, while I was visiting my grandfather's company for some errands, I noticed the lobby becoming noisy. I was standing a bit away, but since the lobby echoed well, I could hear the noise. "Bring out the president now. We know he's here." Hearing these shouts, I placed a hand on my forehead. Peeking from behind a column, I saw Dorothy and Howard causing a scene. Security guards were restraining them as they flailed and yelled, "Let go!" The other employees watched from a safe distance, careful not to get involved. What were they doing here? Perhaps they were so upset about the luxury car the day before that they came to check if my grandfather really owned it. Bored, perhaps? While feeling dismayed, I approached them and asked, "What are you doing here?" My voice, devoid of any warmth or emotion, sounded detached. They turned to me and yelled, "Call the president." "It's your grandfather we're talking about." I couldn't help but laugh at my misinformed in-laws, which annoyed them, causing their eyebrows to twitch. My grandfather isn't here. His actual workplace is the building next door. Next door? What do you mean? In fact, the place we were in was rarely used by anyone. The president's office was located in a rare high-rise building next door. Both this building and the one next door are owned by my company. My grandfather spoke with a voice as if crawling from the depths of hell, revealing himself in the lobby. My usually calm grandfather wore an expression I had seldom seen before, his eyebrows and eyes lifted in a demonic glare. As my grandfather approached them with large strides and looked down at them sternly, Dorothy and Howard could only open and close their mouths like fish begging for food, despite their previous arrogance in belittling others. My grandfather, still unbent and tall, loomed over them with considerable presence. Dorothy and Howard were completely overwhelmed, and all they could manage was to let out a weak, hoarse noise as they exhaled. I never expected to be looked down upon just based on the appearance of the company I work for. What kind of thought process is that? No, I mean, we weren't looking down on you or anything. Dorothy desperately tried to make excuses, but her far-fetched explanations almost made me burst out laughing. If that wasn't condescending, I'd love to know what is. The scenes of Dorothy and Howard hurling abuse at me and my grandfather were clearly etched in our minds. From the beginning, when you visited the company unannounced, I felt something was off. It's ironic to be told I lack common sense by someone without any. As my grandfather confronted Dorothy, Howard began to inch backwards. But the security guards behind him didn't miss a beat, blocking his escape and glaring at him. My grandfather sighed once before continuing. Originally, I lived a bit farther away. But when I could no longer endure my stress due to their taunting, I made preparations to set up a new company nearby to have a small measure of revenge. That's impossible. Dorothy finally managed to speak up, her voice loud. Her lips were pale and trembling, not unlike someone who just got out of a cold pool. Just a few months ago, your company was old and falling apart. There's no way you could prepare a new office in such a short time. You must be embarrassed by being ridiculed by us, so please don't exaggerate. To that, my grandfather replied calmly. That rundown company you're talking about was the first workplace. My real grandfather started from scratch when he founded his business. I kept it because it had sentimental value. The emphasis on rundown was quite strong. Although my grandfather didn't think so himself, irritation and sadness from being belittled by Dorothy were probably infused in his tone. Huh, your real grandfather? What do you mean? I don't understand. Dorothy collapsed weakly onto the floor, literally clutching her head in confusion, and mumbled to herself while looking back and forth between me and my grandfather. Pretending not to notice her gaze, I suggested to my grandfather. It seems she still can't believe it. Why don't you show her the building next door? My grandfather chuckled and agreed, indeed. then pointed towards the entrance of the building. "Would you like a tour if it's okay with you?" His face, previously angry, had changed back to the gentle smile he usually showed me. The intimidation gone, Dorothy and Howard visibly relaxed, their faces shifting from frightened to smirking. However, cold sweat was still evident on their foreheads, showing that they were not completely at ease. "Ah, yes, well, why don't you show us around?" It seems they can't be satisfied without looking down on me or my grandfather. "It's just the exterior that's nice. The inside must be as rundown as this place," Howard whispered to Dorothy, laughing, apparently still not realizing that my grandfather was displeased with being called rundown. Whether he was unaware of his own volume or not, we could hear everything clearly. However, Dorothy and Howard, who had been displaying such confidence, lost their words as they entered the new company. The corridor bustling with many employees, the sophisticated design of the interior, they were so stunned that their jaws might as well have dropped. "What is this? To think that he's running such a large company. Don't joke with us, are you mocking us?" After standing rigid for a while, they seemed to snap back to reality, scratching their heads and beginning to go mad. "Who was it that ridiculed us first?" As they declared this, they stopped in their tracks and collapsed together, then were dragged out by the security guards. After that, we received no further contact from them. Rumor has it that after ridiculing my well-known grandfather in the industry, Howard was being given cold stares at his company. He was feeling so sidelined that he was thinking of resigning from his job. He had mentioned marrying someone of similar social status after our breakup. But now it seems like that's not possible for him. My grandfather has further expanded the company and handed over the presidency to me. And now he is enjoying his retirement. Determined not to be outdone by his greatness, I vowed to work even harder. "10 days after my husband passed away, my eldest son, John, and his wife, Catherine, came to visit me. "So, you're going to be living on a pension from now on, right? How much do you get each month?" John asked bluntly. I answered honestly, just $6.50. They exchanged glances and then snickered. "Wow, how do you plan on surviving on that? And just so you know, don't expect any help from us. We're not taking care of you," Catherine said with a smirk. "Yeah, don't count on us. In fact, let's just cut ties right now," John added, laughing. At that moment, I reached my breaking point. I couldn't take it anymore. I had raised John all wrong. Finally, I calmly said, "That's fine, but don't come back regretting it." Catherine laughed even louder. "Regret it? Who would regret cutting ties with a poor old hag like you?" And so, I cut ties with John and Catherine. But a month later, they would be shaking with fear and regret. My name is Emily Johnson. I'm a 66-year-old housewife. 40 years ago, I married my husband, Tom, who was 2 years older than me. Tom was a sincere and compassionate man who always took care of me. I've been a homemaker, supporting Tom in his small business. Even now, we still live together, though Tom continues to work. Tom and I have 2 children. Our eldest, John, is now 38 years old. John was always restless and rough as a child. He grew up to be something of a bully. And there were more than a few times when Tom and I had to apologize to other parents for his behavior. John struggled with school and barely managed to graduate from a local technical high school. After that, he quickly quit the construction company where he first got a job. He's never been able to hold down a job for long, and has jumped from one to another well into his late 30s. He lives on his own, but the only time he comes to see us is when he needs money. I quit my job again, so could you help me out a little? He would say, always making us give him money. There was even a time when we paid off his debts after he came to us in tears. But despite that, he kept coming back to us for money, and it troubled us greatly. His younger brother, Robert, who is now 35, was a different story. He was quiet, serious, and did well in school. We had a hard time with John, but Robert never caused any problems. He had a smooth school life. John would often mock Robert, calling him a goody two-shoes. And sometimes he even bullied him. Whenever that happened, we scolded John. But I swear, Tom and I never played favorites. We loved both of our children equally. Robert grew up to be a kind and capable person. He graduated from a national university and got a job at the local government office. When he was 27, he introduced us to the woman he wanted to marry, a colleague from work. Mom, Dad, this is Mary. I'm planning to marry her, Robert said. Standing next to him was a lovely woman with a short haircut and a bright smile. Tom and I were thrilled and gave our full support to their marriage. Robert and Mary registered their marriage and moved into an apartment about 30 minutes away from our home. They would visit us occasionally, always bringing gifts and showing concern for us in our old age. Robert and Mary were very dear to us. Then, one day, out of the blue, I got a call from John. Hello? John? What's going on? I asked, a little excited to hear from him after so long. I'm getting married, so I'll bring her over next Sunday. He said abruptly, and then hung up before I could say anything else. What did John say? Tom asked. He said he's getting married and bringing her over, I replied, equally surprised. We contacted Robert to prepare for meeting John's fiancée. On the Sunday John mentioned, the doorbell rang, and when I answered, there stood John, whom I hadn't seen in nearly a year, with a flashy young woman with long, dyed brown hair by his side. Hi there. I'm Catherine, she greeted us casually. She looked to be in her late 20s. I invited them in and led them to the living room where Tom and Robert's family were waiting. Hey, Robert, you're here too, huh? You're still as plain as ever, John remarked when he saw Robert, who frowned slightly. While it was rather unusual for someone in their late 30s to be sporting dyed hair and flashy clothes like John, it wasn't the right atmosphere to point that out. Well, like I said, I'm getting married to her, John said, nodding toward Catherine with his chin. Is that so? And, Catherine, was it? How did you two meet? Tom asked. To which Catherine responded. I used to work at a girls' bar, and John was one of the regulars. Ah, a meeting at a place like that. Typical of John, I thought. Well, I kinda knocked her up, so we gotta get married. John casually dropped the bombshell, causing my eyes to widen. Knocked her up. Catherine, you're pregnant? I asked in shock. Yeah, I'm 3 months along now, she answered cheerfully. And what do your parents think about this? Tom asked cautiously. Oh, I'm not in contact with my parents. We're estranged, so I'm not planning on telling them about the pregnancy or the marriage, Catherine replied nonchalantly. Tom and I were left speechless. But given the situation, it was clear that John had to take responsibility. If that's the case, you should get married as soon as possible. Tom advised, and John and Catherine nodded in agreement. However, the next moment, Catherine said something shocking. "I want to have a wedding too, so you guys can cover the costs." Tom and I both blurted out, "What? A wedding? You want to have one?" I asked, surprised. Of course. A wedding is every girl's dream. I've already booked a venue for next month before I get too big, Catherine said, now dropping any formality. Having a wedding is your decision, but you should cover the costs yourselves. That's what Robert and Mary did, Tom stated firmly. When Robert and Mary got married, we didn't offer much financial help beyond giving them $5,000 as a wedding gift. It was only fair to do the same for John. But upon hearing this, Catherine flew into a rage. "What are you talking about? The groom's parents are supposed to pay for the wedding. We don't have any savings," she shouted. "If you don't have any savings, then all the more reason to start saving for the baby," I suggested, but Catherine started crying. "That's so cruel. You won't even let me have my dream wedding. What if the stress harms the baby?" At that point, as the parents of the man who got her pregnant, we couldn't argue back. Catherine's always dreamed of having a wedding. "You'll cover the costs, right?" John demanded, and Tom and I reluctantly nodded. Shortly after that, John and Catherine registered their marriage. And the following month, they held the wedding. Even though it wasn't well attended due to their lack of friends, the wedding still cost nearly $30,000. Tom and I had planned to cover whatever the guests' gifts didn't. But after the ceremony, John told us, "We're using the gifts for the honeymoon, so you guys can pay the entire cost of the wedding." In the end, we ended up spending $30,000 for John and Catherine's wedding. When I apologized to Robert for the unfairness of it all, he said, "Don't worry about it, but for your own sake, you shouldn't spoil John too much." I could only nod in agreement with Robert's words. After their marriage, John and Catherine moved into an apartment about an hour away from us. We didn't have much contact with them, but about a month after their wedding, my father, who lived far away, passed away. He had been in the hospital for a long time, so I was somewhat prepared. But I still cried when I called John. "John, your grandpa passed away. Will you come to the funeral? He was very fond of you." John responded with annoyance in his voice, "Huh? The funeral? You expect me to go to another prefecture for that? No thanks." "What? I haven't seen Grandpa in years, so I don't care. I'm not going." "Deal with it," John said before hanging up. I couldn't push him further, so we held the funeral with just Tom, Robert, and Mary. They all helped me, and we managed to get through the funeral together. About 6 months after my father passed away, John and Catherine had a baby boy and named him Noah. John brought Catherine and Noah to visit us. The newborn was adorable, and I asked Catherine, "Catherine, may I hold Noah?" Catherine twisted her face and replied, "Huh? No way." I quickly withdrew my outstretched hand, feeling embarrassed. I could understand that there are stressful times after giving birth. But it still hurts that I wasn't allowed to hold my own grandchild. "Hey, we just had a baby, so how about giving us a nice gift?" John said with a grin, holding out his hand to us. After receiving money from Tom and Robert, he immediately opened it in front of us. "Come on, don't you think this is a little short?" John said, looking dissatisfied. Robert, unable to hold back any longer, spoke up. "John, opening the gift right in front of us isn't really appropriate." John glared at Robert and shot back. Shut up. Maybe you're just jealous because you and Mary have been married for years. And still don't have kids? Sorry we beat you to it. What, are you guys infertile or something? How sad. In reality, Robert and Mary had been married for over 5 years without being blessed with children. Mary had confided in me before, tearfully admitting that they were undergoing fertility treatments. Now, she looked on the verge of tears again, and Catherine, noticing this, laughed. Oh, so you guys are infertile? Bummer. Babies are so cute, you know? Mary couldn't take it any longer and left the room, with Robert quickly following after her. John, Catherine, stop speaking to Robert and Mary like that, I said firmly. Catherine responded with a sharp tongue. Shut up, old hag. I couldn't help but snap, what did you just say? But John and Catherine only smirked and walked out. After that, I made sure to keep Robert and Mary as far away from John and Catherine as possible. Not that John and Catherine ever reached out to us unless they wanted something. Tom and I also decided to distance ourselves from them. However, not long after, Tom fell ill and a hospital checkup revealed a malignant tumor. The doctor told us that he had about 6 months left. I was devastated and lost control, but Robert and Mary were there to support me. Mom, it's going to be okay. We're here for you, Mary said, crying along with me, and it comforted me a little. After I calmed down, I called John to inform him of Tom's condition and prognosis. Oh, so Dad's going to the other side soon, huh? Well, good luck with that, John said dismissively and didn't even bother visiting Tom. It was just me, Robert, and Mary who visited the hospital regularly, doing our best to support Tom's treatment. But Tom only got weaker. I called John again, pleading with him. John, please, your father doesn't have much time left. Please come see him. Even just seeing his grandchild might lift his spirits. Why should I bother? It's a hassle. Just let me know when he kicks the bucket, John replied, and he never visited Tom while I was there. 4 months after being admitted, Tom called me to his bedside and told me something that shocked me. But I nodded firmly. Less than 2 weeks later, Tom passed away. Please, open your eyes, I cried, clinging to Tom's lifeless body. Robert and Mary comforted me, rubbing my back as they cried alongside me. But I couldn't mourn forever. I had to carry out Tom's funeral as the chief mourner. Exhausted, I relied on Robert and Mary to handle most of the arrangements. Tom's funeral was well attended by many people from his work, and it turned out to be a fitting ceremony for him. John and Catherine showed up but spent most of the time looking bored and fiddling with their phones. 10 days after the funeral, as I sat alone in the now quiet house, John and Catherine suddenly appeared without any notice. John, you came. I'm glad because I've been feeling so lonely. We're not here for that. The first week after the funeral is over. So it's time to talk about the inheritance, don't you think? John said bluntly. I was shocked. It's true that we would have to discuss it eventually, but I hadn't expected him to bring it up so soon. However, something else caught my attention. Where's Noah? He's still so small, you can't leave him alone. Catherine casually replied, Oh, we gave him up for adoption. What? I gasped in disbelief. Adoption? What did she mean? Yeah, raising a kid was way harder than we thought. So we got in touch with my estranged family and asked if they could take him. My much older sister decided to take him in. Honestly, it's a relief. It was such a hassle. I felt dizzy hearing Catherine speak so nonchalantly. Had John and Catherine really abandoned their responsibilities as parents? Anyway, let's talk about the inheritance. How much did Dad leave behind? He ran a business, so there must be a decent amount. How much do we get? John pressed me for answers. I replied quietly, it's about $80,000. John and Catherine both looked stunned. $80,000. Is that really all? That's so little. Catherine exclaimed. Things haven't been going well with the business these past few years. $80,000 is all there is, I explained truthfully. John grimaced but continued, well, that's less than I expected, but whatever. We should get at least $20,000, right? He was referring to his legal share of the inheritance. By law, the spouse gets half. And the remaining half is divided equally among the children. Well, your father's will is still to be processed, and there are legal procedures to go through. So I can't give you anything right now. Just make sure it happens soon, okay? Seriously, though, this inheritance is way too small. In a time when people say you need at least $200,000 for retirement in addition to pension, you're only left with $40,000? That's sad. As I remained silent, John spoke up. Well, yeah. Mom was a housewife, after all. I guess you'll be living off your pension now, right? How much do you get each month? I answered honestly, $650. They exchanged glances. Wow, how do you plan on surviving on that? Just so you know, don't expect us to help. We're not taking care of anyone else's problems. Yeah, don't count on us. In fact, let's cut ties right now. At that moment, I reached my breaking point. I couldn't take it anymore. I had clearly failed in raising John. Slowly, I spoke to them. Fine, but don't come back regretting it. Catherine laughed loudly. Regret it? Who's going to regret cutting ties with a poor old hag like you? All right then, let's consider ourselves estranged. Yeah, but make sure Dad's inheritance gets transferred properly, okay? Then we'll be done with you. I didn't say anything in response as I watched them walk away. A month passed. I was with Robert and Mary, taking care of some business. And we were just leaving when, by chance, we ran into John and Catherine. Hey, what are you guys doing here? John asked. Isn't this a luxury home builder's office? What were you doing here? Catherine added. Robert replied. We were just meeting with them because we've decided to build a house. John looked surprised. A house? But then he quickly added. Well, I guess it makes sense since you're both government workers. But what's Mom doing here? Mary responded, We've decided to live with Mom. John and Catherine exchanged glances before bursting out laughing. Living together? With this penniless old hag? Wow, that's some serious dedication. But since we've cut ties, she's all yours to deal with. Neither Robert, Mary, nor I said anything. Catherine, still laughing, turned to Robert and Mary. So, you guys are infertile, can't have kids, and now you're going to live with this old hag? Spending all that money on a house just to have her around? How sad. Robert replied calmly, Well, we're not actually paying for the house. What? What do you mean? Aren't you building the house? John asked, confused. Mary glanced at me before speaking. We were planning to, but then Mom. Mom? What do you mean? John pressed. Finally, I spoke up. I'm the one building the house. It's a custom two-family home. And I paid $600,000 up front. John and Catherine's eyes widened. What? That makes no sense. How could you afford a $600,000 house on your pension and with such a small inheritance? Well, I have the money. It's only natural to do this for Robert and Mary since they offered to live with me so I wouldn't be lonely. John furrowed his brow. That still doesn't make sense. Don't lie, old hag. John's raised voice attracted the attention of passers-by. Well, there's no need to explain everything to you since we're estranged. Robert, Mary, let's go. With that, Robert, Mary, and I headed toward our car in the parking lot. Just as we were about to get in, Catherine yelled at Robert. Wait a minute. Is this car yours? It's a luxury foreign car. Didn't you have a regular domestic car until recently? Robert glanced at me, and I nodded. Yeah, Mom bought it for us. John and Catherine looked stunned. Since I don't drive, I figured I'd rely on Robert and Mary, so I bought the car. If they're going to drive it, I wanted them to have something nice. Catherine grabbed John's shoulder. This is weird. Even for a government worker couple? They couldn't afford a house and a car like this all at once. John still seemed confused, but he shouted at me. Explain yourself, old hag. I sighed and, from inside the car, replied to John. If you want to know more, come to the house. We're heading there now anyway. Then I told Robert, let's go, and the car smoothly pulled away. As we drove off, I glanced back and saw John and Catherine standing there, dumbfounded. About 40 minutes after we arrived home, John and Catherine showed up, out of breath. Robert, Mary, and I were enjoying tea, but we paused when they barged in. Hey, explain what's going on. You bought them a house and a car? There's no way you could afford that. I sighed again and set my teacup down on the table. All right, fine. Have a seat, and I'll explain. They sat down on the sofa, their eyes fixed on me. Do you remember that my father, your grandfather, passed away recently? You didn't even attend the funeral. What's your point? He was just an old farmer living in the countryside. My father was a landowner. What? John and Catherine said in unison. A landowner. But he was always working in the fields, covered in dirt. Sure, my father did farming, but that was more of a free-time leisure. In reality, he owned prime real estate buildings and apartments that generated passive income. He believed in the value of hard work, and that's something I admired about him. So, what are you saying? Your father was rich? John asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. Actually, about 10 years ago, I received a lifetime gift from him. And I've been living off rental income ever since. That allowed Tom to use his money for the business. And I knew we'd be fine in our retirement even without his money. John and Catherine were left speechless. I continued. When my father passed away recently, I inherited all his assets as his only daughter. Buying a house and a car for Robert and Mary didn't even make a dent. Why didn't you tell us about this? Did Robert know? John demanded, looking bewildered. Robert shook his head. No. We only found out when we suggested living together. Why didn't you tell us something this important? That's not fair. John exclaimed, growing agitated. I calmly replied, "My father believed that children should live their own lives." Tom and I shared that belief. Besides, I knew if you found out about the money, you'd try to drain every last bit of it. A heavy silence followed as I sipped my tea. Suddenly, Catherine lost her composure. "So, what does that mean? You're rich now because of your father's inheritance? How much money do you have?" I smiled. "I won't go into specifics, but it's around $10 million. And the rental income alone brings in hundreds of thousands a year." Catherine nearly collapsed in shock. Another silence followed before John, sweating nervously, spoke in a pleading tone. "Mom, you're so secretive. How could you keep something like this from us?" "Yes, really, Emily, that's not fair. If we'd known, we never would have treated you that way," Catherine added, trying to sound conciliatory. As I remained silent, Mary quietly poured me another cup of tea. After taking a sip, I said, "Well, we've already cut ties, so my financial situation shouldn't concern you." John began to panic. "Don't say that. Mom, why don't you buy us a house and a car too? It would be easy for you now, right?" Catherine forced a strained smile and added, "Yes, you wouldn't just buy things for Robert and Mary and leave us out, would you? Why should I give money to a son and daughter-in-law I've cut ties with?" I replied sharply. John and Catherine both looked like they were at a loss for words. "Remember, I told you not to regret it. And you're not regretting anything, right?" I said with a smile, watching as they began to tremble. They then desperately tried to undo the estrangement, using every word they could think of to persuade me. But I calmly refused, reminding them we're already estranged. Finally, John couldn't hold it in anymore and shouted, "You stubborn old hag. Fine, we'll just wait until you kick the bucket. You can't have that much longer anyway." I remained unfazed. "Is that so?" I replied, my expression unchanged. Catherine, frustrated, snapped, "Fine. Then at least transfer the $20,000 from Tom's inheritance to us right away. We'll let you off the hook today with that." But Robert calmly interjected, "Actually, John, you're not entitled to any of Dad's inheritance." John sneered, "What are you talking about? Do you think you can fool me? I know the law. There's something called a reserved portion of inheritance. As the biological son, I'm entitled to a share no matter what." He spoke with smug confidence, and Catherine nodded vigorously beside him. I calmly pulled out my phone and played an audio file. The room filled with the harsh, ugly voices of John and Catherine. "Hey, old man. Tell us where you keep your bank books and the PIN numbers. You're going to kick the bucket soon anyway, so we'll make good use of your money. Just hand it over, or things will get ugly for you." John and Catherine's faces twisted with shock. This was recorded by my husband from his hospital bed. "You both came to him while I wasn't around and treated him horribly, didn't you?" I asked, my voice cold. John's voice faltered, "As so what? That has nothing to do with the inheritance." "No, John, it does," Robert interjected. "Dad left a will stating that, based on this evidence, he wanted you disinherited." John looked confused. "Disinherited," he muttered. I decided to let Robert, who had a law degree, explain further. Disinheritance is a legal process where the deceased, in this case, Dad, can request that a specific heir be excluded from receiving any inheritance. If the court approves it, you won't even get your reserved portion. John and Catherine were visibly shaken, the blood draining from their faces. Dad left instructions to disinherit you based on the mistreatment he suffered and the fact that he had to cover your debts. The court proceedings have already started, and it's almost certain that you'll be disinherited. You won't receive a cent. This was what Tom had shared with me on his deathbed. John and Catherine were now pale with fear. Are you saying we won't even get the $20,000 from Dad? John stammered. Both Robert and I nodded. As John and Catherine stood in stunned silence, I continued. You know, even if you were disinherited, there's something called substitute inheritance, which would allow your son Noah to inherit your share. But since you gave Noah up for adoption, you can't touch that money. It will go to him instead. Catherine's eyes widened in panic. We never should have given Noah up for adoption. You had no right to be parents anyway. I've already informed your sister, who is now Noah's legal guardian, and the money will be transferred to her. Looks like your plan backfired. John and Catherine started to panic, turning on each other in frustration. I cut in before their argument could escalate further. By the way, I'm also planning to disinherit you during my lifetime. Even if that doesn't work, I'll be transferring my assets to Robert and Mary as gifts while I'm still alive. You won't get a single penny. John's face twisted in desperation as he suddenly fell to his knees. Mom, please. We spent all our money thinking we'd get Dad's inheritance. Now we're in debt. Please, help us out. Catherine, shaking, knelt beside him, pleading pitifully, please, we're begging you. I refuse. We're already estranged, remember? If you keep bothering me, I'll call the police. This is the last time we'll ever meet. Now get out. In the end, it was Robert who had to escort the crying, desperate couple out of the house. Later, the court recognized Tom's wish to disinherit John, and he was legally barred from receiving any of Tom's estate. The inheritance that would have gone to John was given to Noah's legal guardian, Catherine's sister, who, along with the rest of Catherine's family, was incredibly grateful. Despite John and Catherine's attempts to regain custody of Noah, her family refused to give him up. The situation escalated to a court battle, which John and Catherine lost. Catherine's family then cut ties with her again, promising to take good care of Noah. I keep in touch with them and plan to offer assistance if needed, as I want Noah, who is innocent in all this, to have a happy life. As for John and Catherine, they ended up deeply in debt from their reckless spending, and had to work around the clock to make ends meet. Eventually, the constant arguments over money led to their divorce. Catherine moved far away and returned to working nights. John now lives in a rundown apartment, working in a factory by day and as a traffic control guard by night to pay off his debts. While I hope they learn from their hardships and become better people, I'm not holding my breath. Regardless, it's no longer my concern. On the other hand, I've happily moved into the new two-family home with Robert and Mary. Mom, why don't you join us for dinner tonight? The grilled fish turned out really well, Mary called out one evening. Even though it's technically a completely separate two-family home, Robert and Mary still include me in their lives and continue to treat me with kindness, just as they always have. Sure, I'll bring over some potato salad. You need to eat well, Mary, especially for the baby, I replied with a smile. Yes, just a few months after we started living together, Mary's fertility treatments finally succeeded, and she's now expecting a baby. Robert, Mary, and I were overjoyed by the news. Robert smiled warmly at me, and Mary, with her growing belly, looked happier than ever. In just 3 more months, I'll get to meet my beautiful grandchild. And I'm looking forward to that day with all my heart. You old folks can live in a nursing home. Suddenly appearing at the new property my husband and I had bought. Hillary, our eldest son's wife, said this as she started moving in her belongings, dismissing us with a wave of her hand. I was furious, but a whisper from my husband brought me back to my senses. We decided to leave as Hillary wished. So, please make yourself comfortable. With those words, we left the house. We'll make sure she regrets this. A mere apology won't be enough to earn our forgiveness. My name is Grace Simpson. I'm 60 years old. I have a husband, Robert, who is 3 years older than me, and a son, Ted. We struggled to conceive for many years. Eventually, we started fertility treatments and were blessed with our long-awaited son. We might have spoiled him a bit too much. We gave him everything he wanted and allowed him to do everything he desired. Back then, we loved our son so much it was unbearable. However, that might not have been for the best. As he grew up, he increasingly disliked being instructed by others, and if he was in a bad mood, he would quit things halfway through. Both my husband and I regretted that perhaps we hadn't raised him well. As time went by, our conversations with our son became fewer and farther between. He became engrossed in online games from his middle school days, hardly studied, and just managed to get into a local high school. During high school, he continued to stay in his room, absorbed in online gaming. When it came time to think about his future, he didn't consider it at all and neither continued his studies nor found employment, simply graduating from high school. Seeing his situation, I decided to have him work at the real estate company run by my husband. Though it was just my husband, myself, and my sister working there, and it was a small company. We had never struggled financially and thought we could accommodate our son without issue. Initially, Ted tried to learn his job seriously. But he struggled with customer service and property showings, often leading to complaints. He quickly lost his motivation and began to spend his time idly playing with his smartphone or zoning out at the office. When my husband lost patience and scolded him, Ted snapped back and stopped coming to work altogether. Eventually, Ted only lasted 3 months at work, leaving my husband and me at our wits' end. Afterwards, he spent about 2 years living as a recluse at home, but one day, he suddenly started working part-time at a bar. My husband and I were worried about what he planned to do next. But even if it was just a part-time job, we were glad to see him working and supported him from behind the scenes. However, whenever we asked about his work, he would only reply with yeah or ah, never more than one word. As we left for work early in the morning and he would wake up just before noon, we hardly ever saw each other. When we returned, he would be out at his part-time job, so there was hardly any family time. Still, it seemed like he was somehow managing to keep his job. Then, one afternoon, about 5 years later, Ted unusually initiated a conversation. "Dad, Mom, you're off from work tomorrow, right?" "Yes, we are off, but what's up?" "Actually, I'm getting married. It's sudden, but they're coming over tomorrow." His words were completely unexpected, and I was at a loss for words. Ted was still young and a part-timer. Honestly, I was worried if he could really handle marriage in his current state. "It's okay. You'll see when you meet them." Yet, speaking shyly, Ted had a happy smile. It was the first time I had seen him smile like this, and as a parent, I genuinely felt supportive. Is that so? Ted is finally getting married. I'm looking forward to tomorrow. My husband said with a broad smile, kindly speaking to him. I also told my son, Ted, that's great. I'll make a feast for tomorrow, so wait for it. As I said that, Ted blushed slightly but nodded slightly. Then, see you tomorrow. I'm off to work now. My husband and I watched him leave with a smile. What should we prepare for tomorrow's feast? What kind of person is his fiancé? My husband and I spent that day talking a lot about our son. The next day, fully prepared, we waited for our son and his guests, and around 6 p.m. we heard the front door open. A bit nervous, I headed to the entrance. First impressions are important. I had to greet them properly. However, when I saw the woman who was to be Ted's fiancée, I froze before I could speak. Ah, hello. Sorry for intruding. Before I could speak, she entered boldly into the house, with Ted following her with a smile. I hurried after them. But even my husband looked surprised when he saw them in the living room. The woman Ted brought home didn't seem like she was here for a marriage introduction. Her glaringly blonde hair, miniskirt, and overly bold makeup were surprising. I shouldn't judge based on appearances since Ted chose her. Yet, I couldn't help but feel bewildered by her appearance today of all days. It seemed my husband felt the same, but he still spoke to her in his usual gentle manner. Nice to meet you. I'm Ted's father. I hear you work together. Thank you for looking after him. My husband greeted, but she didn't look at him at all and started introducing herself. Hello. I'm Hillary. Nice to meet you. After introducing herself as Hillary, she took out her smartphone from her pocket and stared at the screen. To be honest, the first impression wasn't great. But I switched gears and brought out the food from the kitchen, setting it on the table. Hillary, nice to meet you. I'm Ted's mother. Thank you for coming today. I've prepared some sushi, so let's eat together. As I said that, she made a visibly displeased face. Ugh, I can't eat sushi. Ted, didn't I tell you before? I can't eat raw food. Did you mention that? Sorry, just eat what you can then. While Ted was apologizing and trying to keep her happy, her anger didn't subside. No way. I can't believe you'd serve something I can't eat. Is this some kind of harassment? Forget it, I'm going home. Raising her voice like a small child, she grabbed her belongings and stormed out of the living room. Ted hurried after her, but my husband and I just watched in dismay. Even after a while, they didn't return. The sushi ordered for 4 remained untouched. And the day's marriage introduction ended there. I honestly expressed my feelings to my husband. I'm worried. Can Ted really make a marriage work with her? Shouldn't we persuade him to rethink this? No, Ted is 25 years old. He should be able to handle his choice of a spouse himself. There's no need for us to say anything. I understand that what my husband says makes sense. Still, I couldn't shake my feelings of anxiety. The next morning, it seemed that Ted had not returned home. Worried, I called him and heard a carefree voice over the phone. Hello, Mom? Sorry for surprising you yesterday. I've talked things through and made up with Hillary, so don't worry. Is that so? Where are you now? I'm at Hillary's apartment. Also, I meant to say yesterday. We're going to submit our marriage registration before the wedding. What? We thought we'd have a proper talk before registering. Anyway, I'm hanging up now. The call was abruptly ended, and without the courage to call back, I was left alone in confusion. Soon after, I relayed the phone call to my husband, Who suggested we try trusting the woman Ted had chosen? He must have his own thoughts, yet he is trying to trust our son. I decided, along with my husband, to trust them as well. 3 days later, Ted returned home, but there was no mention of the marriage. However, a week later, Ted suddenly came to the office on the day James, who runs a construction firm nearby and has known us for a long time, was there. James had been asking to purchase a new property we had, and today he was here to finalize the contract. My husband was not present, but I was managing the situation alone. Hey, Ted. It's been such a long time. James? It's been a while. I heard from your mom that you're getting married. Congratulations. If you decide to build a house, make sure to consider our construction firm. Please pass that on to Grace. After saying that, James left the office. Then Ted immediately asked me, Mom, I overheard a bit of the conversation. Did you buy a new property? What are we going to do with our current house? And where am I supposed to live? Your father and I thought it might be nice to bravely move into a new home. We're not doing anything with the current house right away. That's fine then. Oh, I'm meeting Hillary here today to go submit our paperwork at the office. So, you're finally settling down. Thanks for letting me know. You'll be the head of the household now, so bear that in mind and do your best. I was slightly concerned by my son's remarks about possibly continuing to live at home after marriage. I patted his shoulder with a feeling of hope that they would work hard together as a couple. As I was about to return to work, I noticed that James had left his belongings on the chair where he had been sitting. James, you've left your stuff. Take care, I'll go deliver it. After telling Ted, I rushed out to catch James and bumped into Hillary. Oh, Hillary. If you're looking for Ted, he's inside the office. Take care, I have to step out, but we'll celebrate later. Thanks. Despite her curt attitude, I chose not to dwell on it. Ah, right. Hillary, could you please leave this envelope on the desk in the office? Sorry, and thank you. In my haste, I had carried not only James's forgotten items but also some work documents, which I handed to her. She took them silently without a word. Trusting her, I chased after James. Fortunately, I caught up with him quickly, handed over the forgotten items, and we ended up chatting for about an hour. By the time I returned to the office, Ted and Hillary had already left. I reported to my husband about the matter James had mentioned, and checked the contents of the envelope Hillary was supposed to have left on the desk. Inside the envelope were the property documents and 3 keys to the new house. However, there should have been 3 keys including a spare, but only 2 were present. No matter where I searched, the 3rd key could not be found. My husband had been out guiding a tour, and only my sister was there during that time. I asked if she knew anything about the key, but she did not. Wondering how to explain to my husband that I had immediately lost a key, I decided to also check with Hillary just in case, but the call did not connect. Ted did not answer his phone either. While I was searching everywhere, my husband returned to the office. After explaining what had happened, he helped me look for the key. We searched late into the night around the desk and throughout the office, but the key was nowhere to be found. We both felt dejected and reluctantly returned home. Are you sure there were 3 keys? Maybe there were only 2 after all? My husband asked curiously. When I received them, I checked everything, including the documents and keys. There were definitely 3 keys. Okay. I'll talk to James about the keys. For now, let's just move what we can according to plan. It was past 7 p.m. by then. Together, my husband and I moved only a few items into the new house, which was ready for immediate occupancy with utilities already set up, as we were prepared to start living there at any moment. I had made sure everything was ready. Then, despite having locked the front door, we heard the sound of it being tampered with. Puzzled, we went to the front door together, and before our eyes, the door opened. Hillary and several men and women were there, seemingly oblivious to our presence, beginning to move furniture and belongings inside. Confused by the situation, Hillary spoke to me sharply. "Hey, what are you doing in this house? Trespassing. Don't enter without permission." "Hillary, what are you doing here? Where did you get the keys?" I asked her as calmly as possible, despite my surprise. "Didn't you give me the keys? Ted told me you bought this house, didn't he? A couple over 60 shouldn't be making such extravagant purchases." With those words, my husband and I realized everything. Hillary must have stolen the keys from the envelope I had given her. "I didn't give you the keys, I asked you to leave them on the desk. Stealing keys is theft, you know, and you're the ones trespassing." Ignoring my words, she and her companions roamed around the house at will, making a racket. It was impossible to have a proper conversation. "Enough already. You don't need a new house like this. Why don't you just live modestly in the old one? Ted and I will put it to good use. You old folks can live in a nursing home." Hillary glared at me fiercely. I wasn't scared, but I couldn't believe this person was Ted's spouse. "What kind of person are you? Ah, did you sell the current house or something? Sorry for you. I absolutely can't live with you." Hillary gestured dismissively with her hands, and her companions laughed loudly around us. "It's a waste of time, so go away already." I was about to burst with anger, but a whisper from my husband brought me back to my senses. We decided to leave as Hillary wished. "All right, then enjoy yourselves." With those words, we left the house. We returned to our old home and laughed together with my husband. Isn't this a good opportunity? Let's see if what James said is true. Indeed, I'm looking forward to it. We decided to wait for the inevitable call from Hillary. We'll make sure she regrets her actions. A mere apology won't suffice. As expected, the next day Hillary contacted us. Her voice on the phone was different from any I had heard before. It trembled as if she was frightened. "Wait a minute. You knew about this house, didn't you? Is there a problem?" I almost laughed at Hillary's agitation but restrained myself and pretended to know nothing. "Don't play dumb. You wouldn't be calling if nothing was wrong. I couldn't sleep at all last night, my shoulders feel heavy. And I keep hearing strange noises from an empty room." "Oh, that must have been tough." "Stop it. You run a real estate business, can't you manage a house properly? Don't joke around. I'm going to sue you." She ranted incoherently, seemingly unaware of her own confusion. I sighed heavily and coldly responded to her. "In that case, we will sue you for stealing the keys. We never rented the house to you in the first place. It's a house we bought and plan to live in ourselves. You're the one who stole the keys and trespassed into our house, aren't you? And if there's any damage, you'll be paying for all the repairs." I conveyed these facts in a matter-of-fact tone. Hillary was momentarily flustered but still snapped back. "This house belongs to you, right? It's Ted's house. And Ted's house is my house too. Indeed, it is the house we bought, but we never said we were lending it to you, did we?" Unable to respond, Hillary finally ended the call. Later, my husband and I went to check the house. The lawn was torn up. and there were scratches on the walls and floors, with trash scattered around. We took photos of everything and immediately took action. Everything was prepared, and we summoned our son and his wife to the office. Ted seemed to have heard a distorted version of events from her. Both of you, talking about suing Hillary and making her pay for the repairs sounds like a threat. What are you trying to do? Initially, he was openly hostile, but as my husband calmly explained the situation, his expression turned pale. That's not what I heard. So, what did Hillary tell you? Glancing at Hillary, Ted began to speak in a confused manner. The other day, after we went to submit the marriage registration, Hillary told me that you bought the new house for us. I thought as much. Lately, Ted hadn't been coming home at all, and there had been no contact. If he had known the truth, he surely would have reached out to us for confirmation. I understood he was completely smitten with Hillary. But it was disappointing to see him so easily manipulated. So, how do you plan to take responsibility? My husband asked in a calm voice, filled with anger that made even me shiver. I don't know why I should take responsibility. I was mentally cornered in that house. You should take responsibility for that. Hillary, are you serious? Of course I'm serious. Don't make fun of me. This is why I hate stubborn old people. Seriously, it's so annoying. I expected to live in a decent house since Ted's parents run a real estate company. My life plans are ruined. What are you going to do about it? This must be her true feelings. Hillary tried to lash out at me with bloodshot eyes. But my husband stepped in and shouted, changing his tone. What are you saying? You're an adult. I won't allow you to hurt my wife any further. Bad news, this entire conversation has been recorded. We'll let the lawyer handle what comes next. Stay away from me and my wife for good. Unable to withstand my husband's furious shout and presence, Hillary twisted her face in frustration and stormed out of the office alone. Ted did not follow her this time. Afterward, we consulted again with a lawyer introduced by James and decided to sue Hillary. However, it seemed she realized she had no chance of winning if it went to court. She apparently pleaded with her parents, who later came with her to apologize. Her parents were very apologetic, repeatedly expressing their sincere regret. But Hillary seemed unconvinced. Her father scolded Hillary, and she reluctantly apologized, though she did not seem repentant. Ultimately, her parents pleaded for a settlement, which we agreed to. They paid a suitable amount, and we decided to end the matter there. Ted divorced her soon after and came to apologize to us. Both of you, I'm really sorry. I should have understood Hillary better. As it seemed Ted had finally seen the truth, we didn't blame him. We hoped this incident would help him grow. So, is there something about that house? As the conversation settled, Ted asked what had happened with that property. My husband and I looked at each other and decided to tell him everything. Actually, during the construction of that house, a worker was seriously injured and passed away. Perhaps he had strong unfinished feelings. Several people who said they would buy the house eventually didn't because of paranormal phenomena. We thought we'd buy it to help James and maybe hold a purification ceremony. So, what Hillary said was true. Well, that's the thing. But strangely, when your mom and I lived there, we didn't experience any paranormal phenomena. It's probably because of our daily deeds. Hearing my husband's words, Ted and I couldn't help but laugh. Seeing Ted's smile, I finally felt relieved from the bottom of my heart. My husband and I are living in the newly purchased house, although Ted is staying at his parents' house. He seems to be making an effort to learn household chores that he never did before. What surprised me most was that Ted said he wanted to take the university entrance exams. After this incident, I realized how childish and ignorant I was. It's late, but I want to start studying again. I'll keep working part-time and do my best. After I graduate from university, I'd like to work at Dad's company again. We naturally agreed without hesitation. Tears welled up in my husband's eyes when he heard Ted's words. A smile naturally appeared on my face as I recognized the renewed bond between us.